If you'd told me a year ago that I'd spend my nights half asleep behind a moldy motel counter in the middle of nowhere, I would have laughed and said I'd rather shovel snow for a living. But here I am, a broke 22-year-old with half a college degree and double the student debt, counting pennies to pay off loans while the rest of the world sleeps. They call this place the Misty Pines Motel. Sounds cozy, right? Don't let the name fool you. It's a half-rotten shack on the side of an old highway that snakes through the Appalachian Mountains. Most nights, the only cars that pass by are big rigs howling through the fog or families too lost to turn back. The sign out front used to say, Misty Pines, all bright and welcoming. Now half the letters are dead, so the flickering green neon spells out MSTYPINS, buzzing like a mosquito that won't die. When I got the job, my mom told me to quit after the first week. She didn't like the idea of me working nights, all alone. But I couldn't quit. Not with the bills piling up on my desk back at my tiny apartment, overdue tuition, late rent, credit cards that laugh in my face every month. So I told her not to worry, told her it was just a few nights a week. Nothing ever happens out here. It's funny. People think working the night shift at a place like this must be terrifying. Ghost stories practically write themselves when you're surrounded by peeling wallpaper, flickering hallway lights, and the smell of old cigarettes soaked so deep into the carpet they're probably part of the floor now. But honestly, after a few weeks, the scariest thing is the boredom. You watch the clock crawl from midnight to sunrise. You flick channels on a tiny TV behind the counter that only picks up static and infomercials for miracle blenders. If I'm lucky, I'll get one or two guests who can't sleep in their car anymore and need a cheap bed for the night. But tonight is different. It's the third night of October, and the rain hasn't stopped since before my shift started. The mountains outside are buried under a heavy, cold mist that makes the world feel smaller somehow, like the motel's the only place left. Every now and then, a big gust of wind makes the neon sign out front flicker so hard I half expect it to explode. I'm leaning against the counter, trying to stay awake, watching raindrops smear across the front window. It's the kind of rain that taps out its own creepy little song on the glass, like a million tiny fingers knocking to come inside. I take another sip of my cheap gas station coffee. It's gone cold and tastes like burnt dirt, but it's better than nothing. I tell myself I'll just rest my eyes for a minute, just a minute. But the second my eyelids start to droop, the little bell on the front counter rings. It's an old brass thing with a crack on the side. Nobody uses it because there's never a line at the Misty Pines. The sound snaps me awake so fast I nearly spill my coffee. I stand up straight, smooth out my rumpled uniform shirt, and glance toward the glass door. I don't see anyone. Maybe the wind blew it open. It wouldn't be the first time. I step around the counter and peek through the window. The parking lot is empty except for my rusty old Civic sitting under the crooked streetlight. The sign buzzes and hums like it's laughing at me. I'm about to turn around when the bell rings again. This time louder, sharper. It's like someone slammed their whole palm down on it. I jump back, heart thumping against my ribs. When I look again, the door's open. Just a crack, but enough for the cold, wet air to slip inside and crawl down the back of my neck. I don't see anyone on the other side. I swallow hard, telling myself it's fine. It's just the storm messing with the door. Maybe a raccoon or something. God knows we get enough strays sniffing around the dumpster out back. I walk to the door, push it open wider, and lean out under the overhang. Rain hits my face in icy needles. I squint through the misty parking lot, but all I see are puddles reflecting that sickly green light. Then I hear footsteps. Slow, soggy footsteps squelching across the tile behind me. I spin around, my shoes squeaking on the wet floor. He's standing just inside the door. He looks like he crawled out of a drainage ditch, clothes soaked through and stained with mud, water dripping off the ends of his greasy hair. He's tall, but hunched, like he's trying to make himself smaller. His coat's too thin for this weather, hanging off his bony shoulders like a soaked blanket. In his hands, clutched tight against his chest, is a wad of damp bills and coins that jingle faintly when his fingers twitch. Hey there, I say, trying to sound casual, but my voice comes out too soft, too thin. I clear my throat and try again. Welcome to Misty Pines. You need a room? He doesn't answer, doesn't even look at me. He just walks up to the counter and starts peeling the bills apart, laying them down one by one like they're something precious. The coins he drops next to them roll in slow circles before settling with tiny clinks. Exact change, not a penny over or under. I try to catch his eyes, but they're locked on the counter. I can't help but notice his hands. They're trembling so hard, the coins keep rattling together like loose teeth. Okay, I say, more to fill the silence than anything else. I pick up the cash and glance at the ancient ledger we still use because the computer's been dead for months. Name? He lifts his head just enough to grab the pen I slide toward him. His knuckles are scraped raw, like he's been dragging them on the ground. He writes slow, each letter careful and sharp. J. Gacy. The name crawls down my spine like an ice cube. I don't know where I've heard it before. Maybe in a crime show my roommate forced me to watch once. But I know it's not a name you want to see at 3 a.m. in a half-dead motel with only one exit. Okay, Mr. Gacy, I say, my mouth dry. Which room do you... His head snaps up so fast I flinch. His eyes, gray and watery, like puddles under a streetlight, pin me in place. His lips part, and when he speaks, his voice is barely more than a hoarse whisper, but I hear every word like he's right up against my ear. Do you hear the whispers? My mouth opens, but nothing comes out. He's still staring, waiting. I force out a laugh that sounds wrong even to me. No, sir. I don't hear anything. Just the rain. Which room did you want? He doesn't answer. Instead, he turns away, clutching his handful of coins like they're going to vanish if he lets go. He walks past the counter, his boots squishing water onto the faded carpet. I lean over to see where he's going, but part of me already knows. At the end of the east wing hallway, just past the ice machine that hasn't worked in years, is room 13. The door's there, all right. Swollen wood, paint peeling off in flakes the color of old bones. The sign above it fell off ages ago, but everyone knows it's 13. The previous owner sealed it shut with plywood after the ceiling caved in on a couple who thought it was just another cheap night. I watch the man disappear into the darkness of the hallway, rainwater still dripping from his coat, leaving a trail behind him like a slug. I glance back at the ledger, the fresh ink still drying under the flickering desk lamp. Room number 13. Except it shouldn't be possible. No key. No power. Nobody's supposed to be able to get in there. Yet here I am, watching fresh, wet footprints lead straight to a room that's been dead for years. And somewhere behind the walls, under the hum of the buzzing sign and the steady drum of the rain, I swear I hear something else. Soft, distant, like a voice just out of reach. Do you hear the whispers? I stood there behind the counter for way too long, just staring down that empty hallway like if I looked hard enough, I'd see him come back out. But all I saw was the flickering bulb above the ice machine swinging a little, like maybe someone had brushed past it. Or maybe it was just the draft. This place is full of drafts that come from nowhere and go nowhere, sneaking through cracks in the walls that no one's bothered to patch for decades. I should have done something. Should have called out, "Hey man, you can't go in there." Or grabbed the phone and called Frank, the owner, who lives about an hour away and probably sleeps with his cell off anyway. Or maybe called the sheriff's office, except the idea of explaining to some bored deputy that a muddy stranger just walked into a room that technically doesn't exist sounded stupid even in my head. So, like an idiot, I just stood there. I wiped the counter clean where his money had left little wet circles. My fingers brushed over the name he'd signed in the ledger, J. Gacy. I thought about Googling it, but the Wi-Fi here barely works when it's sunny, and tonight the storm was making it flicker on and off like the neon sign out front. I told myself I'd just wait a minute, give him time to come back out. Maybe he'd realize the door wouldn't open and come wandering back, ask for a real room. Maybe he was drunk or high or just tired and confused. That made sense, didn't it? 5 minutes passed, then 10. I stared at the little plastic desk clock, watching the second hand tick louder than the rain outside. The motel was so quiet I could hear my own heart beating in my ears. Finally, I couldn't take it. I grabbed the flashlight we keep under the counter, the one with half the battery life and a crack in the lens, and stepped around the counter, my sneakers squeaking on the sticky carpet. I hesitated by the snack machine. The hum of its old compressor was the only sound besides the storm. I half thought about grabbing a pack of stale peanut butter crackers for courage, but my stomach felt like a tight knot. I clicked on the flashlight. The beam sputtered but stayed on. Good enough. The hallway to room 13 always creeped me out, even before tonight. It's colder there, maybe because it runs along the back of the building, half buried into the hill that the whole place is sinking into. The wallpaper there is different too. A faded floral pattern that probably looked cheerful in the 70s but now just peels in long strips, exposing old wood underneath that smells like wet dirt when it rains. My shoes squished through the muddy footprints he'd left behind. They looked like they belonged to boots at least 2 sizes too big for his skinny legs. Some of the footprints had little stones in them, like he'd been walking through a creek before he showed up. I passed room 11, the door half open, empty, the mattress inside stripped bare because nobody ever books it anymore. Room 12 was next, the door shut tight. I stopped for a second, listening. Nothing but the tick-tick of water dripping somewhere in the ceiling. Then I saw it, the door to room 13. I'd only ever seen it from the other end of the hall when I brought clean towels to the handful of rooms that still get rented. Up close, it looked worse than I remembered. The wood was warped and splintered at the bottom, dark stains creeping up from years of rain seeping in under the door. Someone had painted a crooked black X across it a long time ago, but the paint had mostly peeled away. I lifted my flashlight and ran the beam over the door frame. The old rusty nails were still there, sticking out at odd angles. Frank always said the door was nailed shut so tight even a battering ram couldn't budge it. Except the doorknob was gone. Just a hole where it should have been, dark and empty. I leaned closer, stupidly, like the hole was going to whisper a secret if I stared long enough. I swear I felt cold air coming out of it, like someone on the other side was breathing through the wood. I stood there, flashlight trembling a little in my hand, arguing with myself. I should have just gone back to the counter, locked the office door, waited for morning. But something in my chest wouldn't let me. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was fear pretending to be bravery. I don't know. But I reached out and pressed my palm flat against the door. It felt warm, warmer than it should have been. I knocked softly at first. "Hello, sir? You okay in there?" Nothing. I knocked harder. The door didn't rattle, didn't move at all, like it was part of the wall. I was about to turn away when I heard it, a soft, muffled sound from inside, like someone moving around, and underneath it, something else, a whisper, or maybe more than one. I pressed my ear to the door, ignoring the wet wood soaking into my shirt sleeve. At first it was just the rain, but then clearer. A voice, a girl's voice. "Help me." I jerked back so fast I nearly dropped the flashlight. I stared at the door like it might open by itself. My heartbeat thudded in my throat so hard it hurt. I told myself I imagined it. Old wood creaks, pipes moan, wind howls. That's all it was. But then I heard it again. Louder, closer. "Please, help me." It wasn't the man's voice. It was a girl, young, soft and shaking. I gripped the handle hole where the knob used to be and pulled. Nothing. I braced my shoulder against the door and pushed. The wood didn't budge. I looked down at the frame. The old rusty nails were bent back, some missing entirely. There was just enough space between the door and the frame that I could see darkness inside. I lifted my flashlight and aimed the beam through the hole. For a split second I saw something. Not clearly, just a glimpse. A pale shape, crouched low, long hair, thin arms wrapped around knees, and eyes, wide, glassy eyes staring right at me. I stumbled back, my heels slipping on the wet carpet. The flashlight bounced off the wall, flickered, then steadied again. The hallway looked different all of a sudden, longer somehow, darker at the far end where the office lights didn't reach. "Hello?" I called out again, my voice cracking this time. "Who's in there? Do you need help?" Silence. Then, a laugh. Childish. Echoing down the hallway like it was coming from everywhere at once. I spun around, shining the flashlight behind me. Nothing. Just the peeling wallpaper, the closed doors, the flickering bulb above the ice machine swinging on its wire. When I turned back to the door, the footprints were gone. The muddy trail that led me here vanished like it never existed. I pressed my palm against the door again, half expecting it to be warm, but now it was cold, so cold it burned. I took a step back, forcing myself to breathe. I needed to call someone. Frank, the sheriff, anybody. But when I turned to go back to the office, my eyes caught something at the base of the door. A little scrap of paper sticking out under the door like someone pushed it through from inside. I crouched down, heart hammering, and picked it up. It was yellowed, damp around the edges, but the handwriting was clear. 2 words, written in shaky blue ink. Find her. I stared at the paper in my hand so long that the edges went soft and damp between my fingers. Find her. It felt like those 2 words weighed more than the whole building pressing down around me. Who? My brain jumped straight to the only girl I could think of. My sister, Laya. I hadn't let myself think about her in months, maybe years. The missing posters with her smiling face. The endless calls to the park rangers, the police, anybody who'd listen. 10 years ago, she'd vanished during a camping trip up near these same mountains. 10 years of no answers, no sign she'd ever been there at all except for a single muddy shoe found near an old fire pit. I'd forced that memory so deep inside me it only came out when I let it. Nights when the apartment was too quiet and the ceiling dripped cold water into a bucket. Now here it was again, raw and ugly, staring back at me in someone else's shaky handwriting. I stood there in that dark hallway with the cold seeping up through my sneakers and tried to breathe slow. Tried to think. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe I'd fallen asleep behind the counter and I was dreaming all this. But my fingers felt the rough paper, and the smell of mildew and old rain was so strong it made my eyes water. I needed answers. I needed to see if that man was really inside. If there was really someone trapped in there. I slipped the note into my pocket and pressed my eye to the peephole where the knob used to be. Nothing but pitch black. Not even the beam of my flashlight could cut through it this time. A sudden thud from inside made me flinch so hard I knocked my shoulder into the doorframe. It sounded like something heavy dropping to the floor, or someone falling. "Screw this," I whispered to myself. I turned and hurried back down the hallway, my wet sneakers leaving squeaks behind me. The flickering bulb above the ice machine popped and went dark as I passed under it. For a heartbeat, the whole corridor plunged into darkness, my flashlight beam shaking against the walls as I half jogged back toward the lobby. I needed the master keys. Frank kept a box behind the counter, locked up because he didn't trust anyone with them, especially not me, the kid who falls asleep on shift. But I'd seen him hide the spare key to that box under the register, taped to the underside where nobody ever bothered to look. I ducked back behind the counter, dropped to my knees and ran my hand along the dusty underside of the shelf. My fingers brushed against cold metal. Yes. The little lockbox clinked when I pulled it out from under the register. I fumbled the key into the lock, my hands slick with sweat and rainwater. Inside, a mess of tarnished brass keys jingled around, each with a brittle paper tag. I dug through until I found the one labeled in fading marker, 13. I stared at it like it might bite me. Part of me wanted to throw it across the room, lock the box back up, and pretend this whole night hadn't happened. But something deep in my chest wouldn't let me. The same stubborn part of me that signed up for night shifts in the first place, that wouldn't let Lila's picture stay buried in a dusty box under my bed. I pocketed the key, grabbed my half-dead flashlight, and turned back toward the hallway. I didn't want to go back down there. Every part of my body screamed not to, but my feet moved anyway, one step after the other, past the vending machine humming like a broken fridge, past room 11's door creaking on its hinges like it was breathing. At the end of the hall, room 13 waited for me. The warped door, the rusty nails, the cold air leaking out like a sigh. I stood there, the master key clutched in my palm so tight it bit into my skin. I slid the key into the lock, or what was left of it. The mechanism inside felt stiff, like it hadn't turned in years. I gave it a gentle twist. Nothing. I tried again, harder. The metal scraped and stuck, but then, with a wet click, it gave. I held my breath and pushed. At first the door didn't want to move. Then it groaned, a low, aching sound like old wood waking up, and cracked open just wide enough for the damp hallway light to spill inside. I lifted my flashlight, shining it through the gap. The smell hit me first. Stale, wet air mixed with something else, something metallic and sour that made my stomach tighten. I pushed the door open wider and stepped inside. The room was a time capsule from hell. The faded floral wallpaper matched the hallway but was bubbled and peeling in huge sheets, revealing rotting wood and black mold underneath. The bed was still there, mattress half collapsed, springs poking through like broken ribs. A single chair sat in the corner by the window, which was boarded up from the inside with warped planks nailed at random angles. I stepped farther in, my sneakers sinking into the squishy carpet. Every breath tasted like mildew and old secrets. The beam of my flashlight danced over the bed, the walls, and stopped. Scratch marks, hundreds of them. Some shallow, some deep enough to gouge through the plaster to the wood underneath. They crisscrossed every wall, chaotic and desperate, all clawing toward the boarded-up window like someone, or something, had tried to escape. My throat went dry. I spun the light around the room, my pulse thudding so loud in my ears I could barely hear the storm outside anymore. On the far wall, above the headboard, someone had scrawled something into the wallpaper with a blunt object, maybe a nail or a broken key. The letters were jagged, uneven, but clear enough to read, "She's still here." I swallowed hard. "Hello?" My voice cracked. "Is someone in here?" No answer. Just the wind rattling the boards on the window. Then I saw it. A small pile of something half hidden under the broken bed. I crouched down, ignoring the smell of mold that hit me like a slap, and reached for it. My fingers closed around something cold and metallic. I pulled it out, and the flashlight beam caught the glint of silver. A necklace, cheap, with a tiny heart-shaped pendant. It looked so familiar I felt my breath stop in my chest. I flipped it over with shaking fingers. Scratched into the back, barely visible under a smudge of rust, was a tiny letter, L. Lila's necklace, the same one she'd worn every day since Mom gave it to her for her 8th birthday, the same one she'd been wearing the night she vanished. I stumbled back, almost hitting my head on the broken bed frame. My vision blurred as my eyes filled with hot tears that made the room swim. I forced myself to breathe, in, out, in, even as my knees went weak. On the floor next to where the necklace had been, something else peeked out. The corner of a small, torn piece of paper. I grabbed it and unfolded it with numb fingers. It was a Polaroid. Faded, edges curled, but clear enough to see. Lila, sitting by a campfire. Her face turned halfway toward the camera, mouth open in a shy smile. The date scrawled on the white border in black marker, October 3rd, the same night she vanished. My hand shook so bad I almost dropped the photo. But behind the panic, something else cut through. Anger. I wasn't leaving this room without answers. I turned toward the open door, ready to run for the phone, for help, but froze. The door was closing, all by itself. I lunged for the door before my mind could catch up. My palms slammed against the warped wood just as it clicked shut, the soft thud echoing through the stale room like a final heartbeat. I twisted the knob, except there wasn't one, just the jagged hole where it should be. My fingers scraped splinters and cold metal. Useless. For a second, I just pressed my forehead to the door, trying not to hyperventilate. The smell of mildew pressed close around me, heavy and wet. The flashlight beam jittered in my hand, throwing frantic shadows across the walls covered in those desperate scratch marks. I backed away from the door, fighting the sick feeling crawling up my throat. There had to be another way out. I turned the light toward the boarded-up window. The planks nailed across it were rotted at the edges. Maybe, just maybe, I could pry them loose. I stumbled across the room, my foot sinking into the soft carpet, which squelched like something alive under my weight. I grabbed one of the boards with both hands and yanked. It didn't move. I tried another, putting my back into it, pulling until my shoulders burned. But the old nails held like iron. Behind me, something creaked. I spun around so fast the flashlight beam stuttered and skittered across the warped ceiling. The broken bed sat there like a dead thing. The single chair by the corner. Nothing else. Get it together, I told myself. I'd seen worse, right? Except I hadn't. Not like this. Not Lila's necklace. Not her picture in a room that should have stayed dead and buried under a coat of dust. I forced myself to look around again. Slower this time. Maybe there was a vent I could squeeze through, or a loose floorboard hiding, a hidden trapdoor. I almost laughed, but it caught in my throat. The beam landed on the old nightstand by the bed. The drawer hung halfway open, wood swollen and splintered. Something stuck out. Yellowed paper, curled at the corners. I grabbed it, my hands shaking so bad I nearly dropped the flashlight. It wasn't just a scrap. It was a page torn from a ledger, the same kind we still kept at the front desk. The top corner read, Misty Pines Motel, guest registry in faded blue ink. Below that, rows of names scribbled in different hands. My eyes scanned down, each line making my chest tighten a little more. Room 13, and date after date stretching back decades. Every few lines, a name was crossed out, replaced by another underneath, as if someone kept reusing the same space. Some names had tiny notes beside them in jittery handwriting. No checkout, never left, gone. Then my stomach flipped. There it was. My sister's name, Lila Hart, written like she'd signed it herself, dated October 3rd, 10 years ago to the day. A noise behind me made my breath catch in my throat. A faint scraping, like fingernails dragging along plaster. I spun the flashlight around. The walls seemed to shiver under the beam, the scratch marks crawling in and out of the shadows. Please don't be real, I thought. Please let me be asleep behind the counter. But the scratching grew louder, not on the walls now, but overhead. Above the water-stained ceiling, something shifted and scraped, moving slowly, as if dragging itself through the rafters. I backed up until my legs hit the broken bed. The mattress sagged under my weight, the springs groaning like an old animal. The scratching paused. Silence. Then, tap, tap, tap. Soft and steady, coming from the boarded-up window. I turned the light toward it. Nothing but the warped planks and streaks of old water damage. Another tap, louder this time. Something was behind the boards. I stepped closer, heart banging so loud I wondered if the thing outside could hear it. The beam found a small gap where two planks didn't quite meet, just wide enough to see out. I bent down, peered through the crack. At first, all I saw was darkness, and then, faintly, movement, a pale shape shifting on the other side of the glass. "Hello?" My voice cracked. "Who's there?" The shape stopped moving. Then, as my eyes adjusted, I saw her, a face, so close to the glass, it was almost pressed against it. Pale, eyes wide, hair hanging wet around her cheeks. Her mouth moved, but I couldn't hear her through the glass. It was Lila. Older than the picture, but still her. Her eyes found mine, and for a second I forgot how to breathe. She looked right at me, mouthing words I couldn't hear, eyes brimming with something between terror and pleading. I pressed my palm to the window, to the cold glass behind the boards. She mirrored me, her hand lifting, fingers spread, tiny against mine. Her lips moved again. "Help me." I slammed my shoulder into the boards, screaming her name. "Lila! Lila, can you hear me?" But the wood held. She flinched, her face fading into the mist outside like smoke blown away by the storm. "No, no, 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 stay! Lila!" My fists pounded the boards until splinters dug into my knuckles. The flashlight rolled across the floor, its beams spinning wild shadows over the ceiling and walls. Behind me, the scratching sound returned, louder this time. Not overhead anymore, but right behind me, at the far side of the room near the corner chair. It wasn't just scratching now, it was a whisper, so faint I thought it was the wind at first, but then it grew into words, layered and overlapping until they crawled over each other like a swarm of insects. "Do you hear the whispers?" I spun around, eyes darting to every corner the beam touched. The shadows seemed to breathe, to shiver in the corners of the room where the light couldn't reach. The old chair tipped slightly, as if something had brushed past it. "Who's there?" My voice came out hoarse, shredded by panic. "What do you want?" The whispers coiled around the room, bouncing off the rotting walls. "Find her! Find her! She's still here!" I clutched the necklace so tight the cheap chain cut into my palm. The Polaroid peeked out of my pocket, crumpled but still whole. Lila's face frozen in that innocent smile from 10 years ago. Focus. I forced my breathing slow. There had to be a way out. If I couldn't break the boards, then maybe the vent, if there even was one. I shined the light along the upper walls, searching for a grate, a hole, anything. There, near the ceiling above the corner chair, half hidden behind peeling wallpaper. A rusted metal vent cover, loose at one side. I scrambled onto the chair, ignoring the way it groaned under my weight. The vent was just big enough for my hand. I reached up, fingers slipping on the damp metal. The whispers fell silent all at once, like someone had snapped them off mid-sentence. The sudden hush made my ears ring. My fingers caught the edge of the vent cover and tugged. It resisted, then gave way with a brittle crack, clattering to the floor. I shined the light into the vent. Blackness stared back, but something glinted in there. Metal. I reached in, shoulder scraping the jagged edge, and felt around until my fingertips brushed cold steel. I pulled it out slow, half expecting something to yank back. It was another key. Old, tarnished brass with a worn tag dangling from it. Office drawer. The ledger. The locked drawer under the counter. I'd always thought Frank just kept spare receipts or old pay stubs in there. Nothing important enough to lock up. But maybe that was the point. I climbed down, clutching the key like it was the last lifeline I'd ever have. The chair creaked under me, threatening to tip. My feet hit the squishy carpet again, and the smell of mold wrapped around me like a wet blanket. Somewhere behind me, Faint but clear, a child's laugh echoed through the walls. Not angry, almost playful, like hide and seek. I turned back to the door. It was cracked open just an inch now, as if inviting me to run. I didn't wait to question it. I grabbed the flashlight, the Polaroid, the necklace, the torn ledger page, and the key, and bolted for that sliver of freedom before it could slam shut again. I burst out of room 13 like it was about to swallow me whole. The door banged against the hallway wall so hard I heard something crack in the frame, but I didn't care. I ran, sneakers squeaking, breath tearing out of my throat in ragged gasps. The flashlight beam bounced off the peeling wallpaper, making the shadows lurch like they were trying to catch me. When I skidded around the corner back into the lobby, the neon sign outside flickered so violently I thought it might short out for good. The MSTY Pin S letters buzzed and spat green light across the cracked front window. I didn't stop to look. I dove behind the counter, fumbling the key out of my pocket. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I dropped the office drawer key twice before I managed to shove it into the rusty lock under the register. For a second, I thought it wouldn't turn. That after all this, the thing would jam and trap whatever secret was inside forever. But with a dry metallic click, the drawer gave in. The smell that came out hit me like a wave. Old paper, mildew, something else underneath, coppery and sour, like rust or dried blood. I hesitated, swallowing the taste of bile crawling up my throat. Then I yanked the drawer open. Inside was a mess of what looked like decades-old motel records, faded receipts, guest sign-in sheets, scribbled notes. But underneath the loose papers, I saw the corner of something thicker, a big, leather-bound ledger, edges worn to fuzz, the spine cracked and peeling. I pulled it out, knocking over a stack of old room keys that clattered to the floor like a box of loose teeth. I laid the ledger on the counter, flipping it open with shaking fingers. The pages were yellowed, brittle, ink bleeding through in places like veins under old skin. My eyes darted down the lists of names, page after page of them, neatly written in the same precise hand. Some I recognized from local news clips I'd half-watched growing up. People who'd vanished on road trips through these mountains, campers who never came home, hikers who stepped off trails and dissolved into the fog. And there, near the back, the names that made my breath stop. Lila Hart. Same date as the torn page I'd found, and right under it, a name written fresh in darker ink, the edges of the letters still pressed deep into the paper fibers. J. Gacy. Below that, a line that hadn't been there before. My name, Alex Hart, room 13, dated tonight. I stumbled back from the counter like the thing might bite me. The rain outside slammed harder against the front window, rattling it in the frame. The neon sign buzzed louder, flickering so fast it stuttered shadows across the lobby. No, my brain rebelled, refusing to accept it. Frank must have done this, or that man, or something. Anything but what it looked like. But the pen was still warm from the last stroke, like the ink was still drying under my shaking fingertips. A soft crack behind me made me spin around. The lobby was empty. The cracked vinyl chairs, the humming TV stuck on static, the vending machine humming by the door. But the front door was ajar now, the storm wind slipping through the crack, tugging the MSTY Pin S sign so it squealed on its rusty hinges. I forced my legs to move, pushing the door wider. Rain hit my face in cold sheets, soaking through my uniform in seconds. The parking lot was empty except for my battered Civic under the crooked streetlight. But the light was dead now, bulb blown out, leaving the car half swallowed by the drifting fog. At the edge of the lot, just beyond the last puddle reflecting green neon, stood the man, J. Gacy. Same soaked coat, same hunched shoulders. He stood perfectly still, facing the woods that swallowed the highway in ragged black shadows. I should have run, locked the door, called the cops, anything but step out into the storm. But I didn't. Some stubborn, furious part of me had snapped awake when I'd seen my sister's name in that ledger. It dragged me across the wet asphalt, the Polaroid crushed in my pocket, the necklace biting my palm. "Hey!" I shouted over the rain and wind. My voice cracked, but he didn't move. "Hey! What did you do? Where's Lila? Where is she?" He turned his head just enough for me to see his eyes, dark pits under the dripping strings of hair plastered to his forehead. His lips cracked into a grin that looked more like a tear in wet paper. He lifted one trembling hand and pointed toward the woods. His voice was a rasp, shredded by the rain, but clear enough to freeze my blood. "Do you hear the whispers?" Before I could step closer, he turned and walked into the tree line. The fog swallowed him up in seconds, like the mountains just opened their jaws and ate him whole. I stood there, rain running down my face, soaking the ledger clutched to my chest. The motel behind me buzzed and flickered like it was alive, the open door gaping like a mouth. Then, faint at first, carried by the hiss of the rain, I heard it. A voice, a girl's voice, so familiar it made my chest ache. "Alex." I turned toward the woods. The trees shivered under the wind. Another whisper closer this time. "Help me." My feet moved before I could stop them, off the cracked lot onto the slick mud at the edge of the trees. The rain turned the world to shadows and moving shapes. Branches clawed at my sleeves. The flashlight in my other hand flickered and died, leaving me blind under the canopy of wet leaves. I should have turned back, should have called for help, waited for daylight. But I couldn't, not with her voice drifting between the trees like a ghost I'd spent 10 years trying to bury. I pushed deeper into the woods, mud sucking at my shoes, breath fogging in the cold night air. The neon sign's dying glow faded behind me until there was nothing but blackness and the sound of my sister's laugh, soft, echoing just out of reach. A shape flickered ahead, pale, shifting between the trees like moonlight on water. I stumbled toward it, branches snapping under my feet. "Lila!" My voice cracked in the dark. "Where are you?" The pale shape paused. For a moment, the fog parted just enough for me to see her. Not a dream, not a picture. Lila, older now, but the same wide eyes, the same shy smile twisted by something sad and sharp. She lifted a hand, beckoning me closer. My foot sank into mud up to my ankle, but I barely felt it. I stumbled forward, hand outstretched. She opened her mouth, but instead of words, the sound that came out was a rush of whispers, layered over each other until they sounded like wind tearing through dead leaves. "Do you hear the whispers now?" The woods behind her seemed to pulse, shadows writhing like smoke. The air turned colder, biting through my wet clothes, sinking into my bones. I clutched the necklace tighter. The Polaroid crumpled and half soaked in my pocket. My name in the ledger burned in my mind like a brand. "Lila, please, come back," I begged, my voice breaking against the wind. She smiled, small, sad, then stepped backward, melting into the black. A sudden crack of thunder split the sky above, and for a heartbeat the woods lit up in blinding white. In that flash, I saw them, dozens of pale shapes standing among the trees, faces half-turned, eyes wide and empty. Some looked like old photos, blurry around the edges. Some were only outlines in the mist, all watching me, all whispering my name. And then, darkness again. Just the wind, the rain, and the taste of fear at the back of my throat. I turned back toward the faint glow of the motel sign, the only piece of the world that still felt real. I ran for it, splashing through the mud, the whispers chasing me all the way back. By the time I stumbled out of the woods, the rain had turned the parking lot into a shallow lake. My shoes squelched with every step, but I didn't dare stop. The neon sign above the misty pines flickered so hard I thought it might burst into sparks, the half-lit letters sputtering their green glow across the motel's cracked siding. Inside, the lobby looked exactly the same as I'd left it. The hum of the TV stuck on static, the row of empty chairs no one ever sat in, the smell of mildew fighting with the burnt coffee stink drifting from the cold pot behind the counter. For a moment, I just stood there in the doorway, dripping rain all over the cracked linoleum, the ledger clutched tight under my arm. I could feel the cold metal of Lila's necklace pressed into my palm, the Polaroid soft and damp in my pocket. They felt real, solid, more real than the faint voices I could still hear if I closed my eyes, drifting through the walls like the sound of a TV left on in another room. I forced my legs to move, crossing the lobby to the counter. I dropped the ledger on the battered surface and flipped it open to the last page, the page where my name now sat under room 13, clear as day. Alex Hart, the date, tonight. For a heartbeat, the room seemed to press in on me. The buzzing sign, the whispering rain, the static from the TV, all blending together into one low hum that made my teeth ache. I slammed the ledger shut so hard a cloud of dust puffed up around it. I needed help. Real help. The kind that carried guns and radios and didn't look at me like I was crazy when I said the walls whispered at night. I fumbled the old landline phone off its cradle and jabbed 911 with fingers that barely felt like mine. The line clicked. I pressed the receiver to my ear, listening for the dull ring. But all I got was silence, then a crackle of static, like the TV behind me. Then, faint, far away, a voice I knew too well. Alex. I slammed the phone down like it burned me. The dial tone never came. I was shaking so bad I had to brace my hands on the counter to keep from collapsing. My eyes flicked back to the ledger. It sat there, still as a grave marker. I grabbed it and flipped through the pages again, half expecting my name to vanish like the muddy footprints in the hallway. But it was still there, pressed deep into the yellow paper. I thought of the girl's voice in room 13, the cold air through the knob hole, the scratch marks on the walls that no one had bothered to paint over, the childish laughter echoing through the vents, and the man, Jay Gacy, who'd walked into the woods like he belonged to them. It all tied back to this place. The motel, room 13, and the ledger that seemed to know who'd never leave. I needed proof, something to show the cops if they ever bothered to come out this far. I rummaged under the counter for the old Polaroid camera we kept for guests who lost their IDs. The batteries were probably dead, but I had to try. I loaded the film with trembling hands, flipped the switch, and aimed it at the open ledger. The flash popped, a burst of harsh white light that burned my eyes for a second. I tugged the photo out and laid it on the counter, watching the image bloom through the gray fog of fresh film. My name, Alex Hart. Room 13. Proof, I told myself. Proof it's real. Then, a soft hum behind me. The old lobby intercom, a relic from when Frank still pretended to do morning announcements for the cleaning crew. I hadn't heard it crackle in months. It hissed once, twice. Then a voice spilled through it, thin and stretched, like it had traveled too far to stay whole. Do you hear the whispers now? I spun around so fast the camera nearly slipped from my hands. The intercom speaker above the doorway was just a cracked plastic box, its grill caked with dust. But the voice, that voice, it was Lila's. Older, warped, but hers all the same. Lila! I shouted at the empty room, my own voice echoing back at me through the hiss. Where are you? I'm here, okay? I'm not leaving without you. The static crackled louder, filling the lobby until it felt like the walls were breathing with it. Then, under the fuzz, laughter. A child's giggle, soft and close, like someone crouched just behind the counter, waiting for me to peek over. I forced myself to look. Nothing but the stack of spare guest keys scattered across the floor where I'd dropped them. But the giggle drifted up through the vent behind the counter, threading itself through the wires of the old intercom like a song stuck on repeat. I knew then, this place wasn't done with me. Maybe it never would be. Maybe that was the whole point of room 13, a door that never really stayed shut, a name in a book that never really got erased. I should have run, but instead I grabbed the ledger, the necklace, the Polaroid, my sister's face frozen in that campfire smile, and pushed through the office door into the back hallway. The old maintenance stairs groaned under my feet as I climbed to the second floor, past rooms 6, 7, and 8, their doors cracked like half-closed eyes. At the far end of the hallway, where the wallpaper peeled away in thick yellow curls, the door to room 13 waited for me again. Or maybe it had always been waiting. I don't know how it moved up here, or if it ever really moved at all. The number 13 painted right on the door in black marker that looked fresh and wet. I pressed my palm to the wood. Cold this time. So cold it burned. "Lila," I whispered. On the other side, a whisper answered, her voice so close it could have been my own breath fogging back at me. "Alex." My hand found the knob hole. This door still had its handle. I turned it. It opened smooth as butter. Inside, the air was warmer than I expected. Almost too warm. Dust motes spun in the faint glow of an old bedside lamp that shouldn't have worked. And there she was, my sister, standing by the boarded window, her back to me, hair long and tangled down her shoulders. "Lila," she turned. Her eyes found mine, wide, dark, soft with the same pleading I'd heard 10 years ago. She opened her mouth. "Help me." I crossed the room in 2 strides, my boots silent on the rotten carpet. I reached for her hand, ice cold, but she didn't pull away. She just looked up at me, and for a second I thought maybe we could just leave, walk out that door together and let the rain wash all of this away. But the lamp flickered. The shadows in the corners stretched like tar, and in her free hand, I saw it. The same torn ledger page, my name pressed into it in that same heavy ink. Her lips moved again, and I swear I felt her breath against my ear this time, carrying the words I dreaded all night. "You're with me now." The door behind me creaked. The cold wind spilled in. And then, nothing but the hum of the neon sign outside, sputtering into silence as the storm swallowed the misty pines whole.